professional level. This is why. All right, guys, welcome back to the Baseball Recruiting Deep Dive Podcast, Episode 3. Today, we're joined by CJ Suarez, pitching coach and recruiting coordinator at University of Maine. A little bit about CJ. Started his coaching career at Bridgeton Academy, which is a prep school in Maine, after graduating from St. Joseph's College. Coached in the NECBL Collegiate League from 2017 to 2021. In 2020 to 2022, he was player development for Mayhem Nation in Florida, which is an amateur baseball organization. And from 22 to 2024, he served as a pitching coach at IMG Academy. CJ, thanks for joining us, man.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys having me. This is, I love working with you guys at Elite Sports Advising, and, pumped to talk some ball here.
Yeah, we appreciate you jumping on, man. So I think first thing for you, let's just kind of talk through your path. So, I mean, how did the IMG situation come up for you, or the opportunity, I should say, from Bridgeton to there, and then again from IMG to UMaine? How did that come up with Coach Durba as well? Just talk about that path a little bit.
Yeah, I kind of have a very unorthodox path. This is actually my really first college stop, which is pretty crazy at 31 years old. And I took a different path than most guys. From Bridgeton, I obviously got to know Aaron Isaric. He's one of the best in the business, and just developing people and coaches. So from there, I took a leap of faith, and I went down to Florida to work in the travel ball circuit with Mayhem Nation. And the owner of that is Greg Creek. Greg is a Maine alum, played with Aaron Isaric at Maine. Took a leap of faith, wanted to do something different at the time. And I was at the right place, right time. And John LeCaff is one of the recruiters down at IMG. And Johnny was my assistant coach for Mayhem. We had his son, John, on our team as well. And John is a former college baseball coach. He was a recruiting coordinator at Cincinnati. He knows the game really well. He's a true baseball mind. And he does all the recruiting at IMG. And, it was just kind of coincidence. He knew my background and what I was trying to do. And, he asked me one day if I had any interest in IMG and going over there and helping those guys out and working with some pitchers, helping with the recruiting side of stuff for those guys, and help placing their players. And, I really wanted to get back into, a more, college setting and truly player development setting of baseball. And, Johnny hooked me up with a job there. The rest is kind of history. And then my transition from IMG to Maine, it truly became about, connections and being connected with Derbs. Nick Derb has been our head coach for the last 9 years. Derbs and I go back to when I was coaching at Bridgeton with Aaron. Aaron's a former Maine player, freshman All-American, and has really deep ties to the university. So mutual connections. I've known Derbs back, and we've talked back and forth about prospective players. And then Derbs reached out to me on a summer, really hot summer day, doing camp at IMG, and said, "You want to come to Maine?" And I was ready. I was packing my bags, ready to go back to New England.
Sweating through your sliders. You're thinking, yeah, Maine sounds kind of nice right now,
Yeah.
CJ, obviously now, I think as of today, there's over 5,000 players in the portal. Like, where does a college coach even begin that process of identifying, like, who do you want to start reaching out to and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we try to go through the entire thing, as a complete staff. We have a spreadsheet going of who contacted who through email, through text, and if we have a mutual connection, we use that mutual connection, to see how the player is, skill wise, but also, what is he like as a person? He's a good teammate, a good human being. Is he a fit for Maine? You really got to be a fit for Maine. You can't just be another ball player to play at Maine. But we go through that as an entirety and really see what our needs are for the fall as well. We're not necessarily a place that is going to flip over a roster every single year, and we don't have NIL. It's a working process for us. But we're still out there and we're still chasing the best players possible for us and good fits for the university as a whole in the program.
Would you say when you're looking in the portal, do you have like the first group of schools, for example, like a local Division 2, they had a stud. Like, are you checking to kind of see schools around you to start? Or I guess just for me, I would just be curious to hear like how does that first group of schools really start to who you identify as who could be potential fits for Maine? Like what programs have those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big piece of it as well. And when we're going through it, and we're seeing guys from places like Endicott or Salva Regina, or Southern New Hampshire. We have connections with those guys, and a lot of those guys, we came up. One of us has on the recruiting circuit,
Yeah.
with them. So we have a good relationship. We have the ability just to pick up the phone, give them a call, see if it's a fit. See if the kid's looking for something, in the Power Four, or if he just wants, opportunity to play, develop, and have a chance to win a championship and be a pro. But I'd be lying if I said we weren't getting out of our comfort zone as well, and speaking to players, down in the Southeast or the Midwest, or even the West Coast.
CJ, Murph has asked this our first two episodes to the guys we've had on, but I think it really is such a great question because it's something that parents need to know. Like, have you become more picky recruiting high school players because of the portal? Like, you can get a guy who's got 600 at bats under his belt, or 100 plus innings under his belt with good numbers. Like, to out to beat a guy like that out in a roster spot for a high school guy, like they kind of have to be more polished now than ever before. Is that kind of how it is for you now?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking for the best players. I would say, at Maine, we need to develop our guys, and our high school classes are still very important. If not the most important to us. We want to build our roster through the middle of the field, and within that, I don't know if we're going to get a starting shortstop out of the portal or out of junior college. Those things are a challenge for us, but we're still bringing in anywhere from 7 to 10 high school kids per class. We're trying to build through the middle of the field, and we're trying to develop those guys, because in the end, the best players that have played at Maine and the guys that have moved on to play professional baseball are high school guys for us. And we're going to continue to, put our foot on the gas when it comes to high school recruiting, because I think we do a really good job of developing players. And since Nick Derb has been our head coach, he's done a tremendous job of developing guys, especially hitters. It's a challenge to develop hitters in the Northeast. I feel like, because I feel like they're a little bit behind coming out of high school, just because of the lack of at bats because of weather.
Yep.
And continuously spit out draft picks and guys like Jeremiah Jenkins and Noah McDaniel, and have had some really tremendous, offenses. And I think that's impressive. And as well as the arms, like we're getting Northeast high school arms, and, they're big, they're physical, and we're just trying to get them that much better and reach their ceiling, and I think the opportunity is there for guys to pitch and pitch early. Right now on our staff, we have Gianni Gambardella from Connecticut. He was a freshman All-American, and he's had the ability to develop and pitch a lot, and now have an opportunity to go pitch down the Cape Cod League this summer, and, come back and, be the Friday guy. And I think that's important.
CJ, you're one of the only guys who says go down to the Cape Cod League.
Yeah.
Everyone else says you're going up to the Cape Cod League,
That's
man.
true. That's true. That's true.
You missed a big name from the development standpoint, and Jeremy Pena as well, man.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
JP was Derb's first recruit ever as an
Yeah.
assistant, and JP is obviously having a hell of a career, and he's representing Maine well.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to what you said about keeping your foot on the gas with high school kids. I've noticed that you guys tend to be a little bit more aggressive when you like a guy. It's like, hey, we like him. He checks all the boxes. We're ready to go. Whereas some other coaches, not in a bad way, but some coaches like to see multiple tournaments. Some coaches like to see 30, 40 at bats. Can you kind of just talk about your mentality with that, and just kind of how you guys approach on the high school side of things in that regard?
Yeah, yeah. So for us, it's we go see him once. We like him, we're gonna move on him. And for us, it's not necessarily results based, right? Hitters don't have to go 3 for 4 with 2 doubles and a jack. As long as they have some barrels, they move well, and whatnot, and we're in on them, we're going to go after them. It's a very big, like, Derbs talks about all the time. He says, if you tell me I have to go see him again, then he's not a guy for us. And we're going to be super aggressive in that sense.
Love that.
But,
Yeah.
it's also about our connections. Like, if Murph's telling me, like, hey, you got to go get this guy, I go see him and I'm like, yeah, we need to go get this guy. Like, I can watch video continuously and follow stats. Stats still matter. If you're not dominating high school baseball, you're probably not a guy in general. You might move well, you might have all the pro tools and whatnot, but if you're hitting 250 in high school, then
Yep.
you're probably not a guy in general. And I think we utilize technology to a bigger extent. We're constantly using our connections, checking up on guys, seeing how they're doing, following their stats, as well as, using the people that really understand the game of baseball and trusting them.
Yeah, and CJ, you are our first pitching coach on here, and I think definitely like how pitchers and what coaches are looking for in pitchers has changed. I mean, the strike zone seems like it's much smaller than it was when I was in college. 4 inches off the plate, it was like a strike almost every time, and now it's like it's a lot closer to just really a pro style strike zone. Like when you're recruiting a pitcher, what are you looking for? What attributes are most important to you?
Yeah, looking for an athlete and total athlete, and somebody that necessarily doesn't have to, really blow it out right away. He doesn't have to be 91, 93. For us, we're looking for some projectability, a guy that we can get hands on with and truly make better. I mean, usually those guys can be a little bit more physical. Those guys can be those 6'3", 6'4" guys. But those smaller end guys, they usually move well and they usually can command multiple pitches for strikes. So in reality, if you can have fastball command, if you can land a secondary pitch for a strike, the rest is gravy. And you got to move a little bit. You got to move well on the mound for the most part. You can't be super stiff, but
Sure.
if you have that ability and you show like, I feel like the easiest thing in today's game is to see how competitive people are because there's a lack of. And I mean, I can remember it in high school and whatnot. There was, a very, very high compete with lower level players. But I think that's an easy thing to see in today's game. And honestly, with using other people as well and using our connections, just asking them what they're like as a teammate and how competitive are they. I think that's important.
Yeah. When you talk projectability, are you saying in your eyes that's more on, like you said, how athletic the kid is, the arm speed, just how he moves in general, or are you tying in the TrackMan data, the Rapsodo data to kind of see what more might be in the tank for this kid down the road as well?
Yeah, I think it's cohesive. I think for us, we're not going to get finished products out of the high school ranks, and that's what we want. So it's cohesive for sure. I think the TrackMan stuff is great, but just using our eyes as well of seeing like, how far off is that slider, right? Can we make that adjustment? When I got hired here and everybody started moving over from curve, like bad curveballs to sliders. Derbs called this slider U all of a sudden, and so, but like stuff like that, really it's more about like how they move. Do they have fastball command? Can they spin the fastball pretty well that could potentially play up when it actually is that 88 to 92? Can it play up to 94 for us? So things like that. I think TrackMan's good. Rapsodo stuff's good. We utilize that stuff and we look for outlier stuff as well. But it's not an end all be all.
CJ, when you're out recruiting, and you're talking about, you seem like it's easier now more than ever to kind of pick up, is this kid competitive or not? And kind of, I'm reading between the lines and basically like, when they go through adversity, you can see the kids that like really let it affect them, and the guys that are just kind of stone cold out there, don't let it bother them. When you're out watching guys, we talk to our clients all the time about, there's things you can do that are not hitting pitching on a baseball field that can turn into a big red flag for a coach. Like when you're out watching guys, what are the red flags for you? And like, I don't know if this guy's going to be a guy for us, and not performance stuff, just like emotionally, how they handle themselves on the field.
Yeah, I think, when we look at guys and we definitely like, I love seeing guys go through adversity throughout a game. I'd rather guys fail a little bit when we go see them then, have that special day where they're 4 for 4 with 4 home runs. I want to see those guys and emotionally, can they check back in? Do they make the last out with, the tying run on third base in the sixth? Can they check back in the top of the seventh, go play defense? And it's more or less like you have a bad at bat. Can you get back on the field and check yourself back in? Because that's important, right? You got to keep moving on. You got to keep going. And like that's one of the things we talk about with our pitchers all the time is just you got to keep going. You're gonna have a bad outing, but it's about can you come back from that? Can you face it head on and just run into the storm?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And you see, I mean, one of the things we wanted to talk about was you see how these freshmen can come in and struggle with a lot of different things when they get on campus. So, can you kind of just talk us through what are some of the biggest struggles that you see a freshman when he comes on campus? Where do you see those guys? Where are they behind the most, whether it be academically, athletically, physically? Like, where do you see that happen the most?
Biggest thing is the weight room. That's by far the biggest. Actually, our 2025 class, we don't have a single guy playing this summer. They're all lifting the entire summer. And that helps us is, most of the pitchers are throwing anywhere from 40. We have a couple IMG guys coming in that have thrown 65 innings. So, go get stronger because when you get to fall baseball and we start scrimmaging, it's a big man's game now, strong man's game. And that's kind of the biggest thing that we see. I think guys are a lot more mature in today's game, and the ability to live away from home is not, a major thing for a lot of people anymore. And it's remarkable because when I was coming up, that was definitely a challenge for a lot of kids. Time management, going to class, getting their work done, getting the extra hitting and baseball stuff in as well. But by far right now, the biggest gap we see is in the weight room.
Yeah. So can you kind of expand on that and just talk through when you guys get into your 20-hour weeks in the fall? Can you just talk through kind of what the day in the life looks like for you guys between class and lift and everything they have to take care of?
Yeah, yeah. So, for us in the fall, we have our guys, take a minimum of one online course just to get ready for what spring looks like. And our freshmen, we want them to come in, take in-person classes, get adjusted to, our faculty members and just the community at the University of Maine. So within that, we're lifting at times. We'll lift 4 days a week. 2 days of the week, we're probably lifting at 7 a.m. so guys can get to their 8:30 class. We're not big proponents on the 6 a.m. lift. We want guys to sleep, recover, and perform.
Man, that sounds nice. That sounds nice. CJ.
Yeah,
That
right.
was Kyle's favorite part of college, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from there, we'll usually practice, in the afternoon at some point if it's 2 or 3 o'clock, and we'll go for 2 to 3 hours at a time. What we're trying to do is we're in this, from the spring we had 10 a.m. practices and it was awesome, and that was because everybody was online. So we're trying to push more to bring those practices a little bit earlier in the day, and our ability with that would be guys can sleep in. We practice say at 10:30 in the morning. We practice, get the baseball stuff done, and then they're lifting post practice because that's important. For our pitchers on bullpen days, we'll always throw a pen before we lift, and our pens are spread out throughout the day. So whatever their class schedule is, for instance, say a guy has a class at noon. He may throw his pen at 9:30 in the morning with a catcher, myself, and our two other coaches or three other coaches, and that's his work that day. And he'll come out to full team practice, and he'll still do PFP and pick work and stuff, but very low maintenance on his arm. So our guys are very spread out. I will tell you, it's very player development focused, and the fact of we want guys to smash weights, smash food, and smash sleep, and that's it. So it's not necessarily a place that we're up at 6 a.m. and we're just grinding them away, because at some point you keep grinding, it's just going to turn to dust.
No, I think that's awesome. I mean, especially for the spring schedule, because like all of us know in that spring schedule, it's really hard. Like if you work out before practice and you're actually getting a workout in, you can feel that in BP, you can feel it in inter squads or even in the games. Like, man, I'm not moving as good as I normally do because you worked out in the morning.
Yeah.
So I love the fact you guys can get that, set the schedule like that to where you're you're practicing early, and then you can actually go hard in a lift. Because I remember it'd be like it's upper body day, but I don't want to feel weird in BP, so I'm just going to take it lighter today, and I'm not getting as good of the lift in. Let's segue back to a little bit on the recruiting side. So CJ, obviously with this house settlement stuff, still up in the air. Who knows what's going to happen? Probably going to go through. Like, are you guys going to be operating at the 34-man roster for next spring?
No, so we'll be opting out for next spring. Administration wants us at that 38 to 37 mark for our roster, which I think is important for us. It gives us some flexibility with who we're bringing in and what we need as an entire roster. There was a time where I think we thought that for sure we were going to opt in due to Hockey East hockey at Maine and being fifth in the country last year and winning the Hockey East. But as of right now, we're not going to opt in. But we're going to be at that 37, 38 mark. And I think the thing is really is we're trying to go into the fall with our team and just try to make those guys better. We want to be excited from day one in the fall and who we have on our roster and, continue to just make those guys better rather than bringing a significant portion of players, and guys, we're just evaluating at that point. We got to evaluate a lot of players, see where guys are at, and then make some decisions. We're super excited about next year's class. We got some big physical boys and, we're looking forward to getting those guys on campus. And it's pretty remarkable. I had a real feel of what Maine was like in general and the recruiting landscape, but we've done a really good job of really going nationwide and, guys on our roster from Idaho to Washington, as well as, getting into that IMG circle and the Florida circle a little bit and bringing a couple of those guys up as well. So we're super excited about the class and we're ready to get going.
Yeah. So when they give you that 37, 38, whatever the number's going to be for that given year, are you guys from there kind of looking, hey, we're gonna need 3 or 4 transfers here, and we're gonna stick with our 7 high school guys? Is that gonna be a year-to-year thing where you kind of evaluate like, hey, this guy just didn't make the jump that we thought he was going to, or we might have to go look for somebody else to fill a gap? But I guess the question is, how early are you factoring in where you're going to have to replace or where you're going to have to bring in transfers versus the high school kid once you have that number?
Yeah, we talk about it, at least once a week, if not, every day throughout the spring of just what we think we need for next year. Our high school class is obviously a year out. Currently working on the 26 class and getting some names for 27. But we don't have a set number. We don't have a set number. We take the Andy Reid method. We want the best players possible. And, we're not necessarily, we definitely have a breakdown on our roster of what we need and whatnot, but, we are going after, dudes, and that's what we want to continue to do. And, right now we only have one left-handed pitcher on our staff next year. And for us, for some people that's a red flag, but for us, I would rather have, a big donkey, a right-handed pitcher that can fill it up and get downhill, and can compete at a high level than, just having another lefty on the staff. I think that's important.
Yeah, it's almost like, it'd be great to have more lefties, but if they're not a lefty that can fill a role of like getting lefties out, or, he's not actually, we're just going to throw another lefty on the roster to hope he can, do something for us, doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's talk about the kind of the general academic requirements for Maine. Like if a recruit is interested in Maine, like what does GPA, test scores, anything, like what does that have to look like for you guys?
So a good thing about Maine is we're test optional. I think that's kind of the new landscape of a lot of schools in today's world. And, I wish I had that when I was growing up, so I didn't have to take SATs, but, but we have high-end merit packages within our university, and we're super aggressive within that. So you can get merit money as low as the GPA is 2.5. And then as it gets higher and higher, you're going to gain more and more money, and also revolves around where you're from. We're trying to match merit money with what it would cost to the universities of Massachusetts for local Massachusetts kids, as well as in Rhode Island and Pennsylvania and whatnot. So we're trying to be aggressive within that stuff. And I think the university does a great job of trying to branch out and try to get, a more diverse, student body, which I think is important, and it helps us, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. How, in terms of identifying guys right now, obviously you're shifting into seeing some 2027s this summer. But how early is that process starting now? Like when do you start to build that list of 28s or the current or next year's sophomore class, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely haven't, touched 28s at
Yeah.
all. If I see them on the road, we write them down and we keep them in a log and, keep them on the board, right? Like 27s is a really small list still right now. People that have reached out to us, we're starting to keep a board of guys. If we see them in the summer, great. It's not a priority right now for us. We do really well in the summer leading up to guys' senior year. So obviously right now, 2026 class, rising seniors, that's our main focus on the high school landscape right now. We will see some 27s. There's, we got to do a better job, obviously, of identifying those guys earlier. But at the same time, we need to take care of what's in front of us and what's in the present moment.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of recruiting now is hopefully there's a shift in the transfer portal where guys are not entering as frequently because the process is happening later. You're seeing the kid more of I guess a finished product closer to when he's coming on campus. So you have a much better idea of who that kid's going to be versus having to commit a freshman before another big school steps in and you feel like you want to get him early. So yeah, I think that's a great point. You just kind of have a much better feel of who you're getting. Obviously, the later you go.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I think I got into college baseball at a good and chaotic time, but I can remember working with guys at IMG and those high level guys that were freshmen at the time of, I can remember working with, Sean Gamble a little bit and, hopefully he goes in the first round this year, but it was just chaotic and it was just consistently like, hey, can you call X, Y, and Z school? And he wasn't ready to make a decision. He's an old school kid that, wanted to wait and wanted to see how things shake out. And it was a breath of fresh air because there's a lot of guys that wanted to commit super early and get that stuff done. But for the sake of on the other side now, the college coaches, I think it's better for us.
100%. So CJ, this is something we're talking about now as well. Obviously, with the portal, it's kind of changed the outlook on recruiting. Like before the portal, I think a lot of schools were like, well, okay, 2 years out from now or 3 years out from now, like that class coming in is going to be really good. I was talking to Zeke Pinkham at Kent State a few months back, and he's like, man, it's all year to year now. I mean, you're reloading for what you need every year. Is that what you guys are doing at University of Maine? And if not, like, what's your outlook on that?
No, we're definitely doing that. And we're talking about our roster on a consistent basis, trying to find what our needs are in the moment, but as well as, working on those high school classes because those are important for us. And I think, maybe in today's landscape with rosters getting cut and, guys that are entering the portal that just flat out want to play baseball. I think that's an advantage to us. We can offer guys an ability to play every day at a university that spits out draft picks, and wins at a high level. So, I think we're the good blend right now of what we can possibly offer, student athletes for the sake of also the financial package and but the ability to come here, win, and be a pro, I think is a huge selling point for us, and we're going to continue to use that as our marketing tool.
I've noticed with a few kids that we've had visit you guys, you've been very, I guess, positive in responses about the family in general. How important is that to you guys in the process to have a family that loves it, to have a connection with them as well? Like, how much are you evaluating just the whole picture through that process?
Yeah, it's super important for us, and it's because in the end, your support system is the biggest thing for our players. We're a part of that when you decide to come to Maine. But your parents, for us, have to check a lot of boxes, and they have to be invested in Maine. They have to be invested in the school, the baseball program, and they have to have what we like to call having some feel. They have to have some feel within the recruiting process. It's a challenge. You want what's best for your kid. We understand that. But if you ask good questions and it's not overbearing and we're not recruiting the parents, we want to recruit the player and get to know the player on visits. But also like we want to discuss, certain topics with our parents because I think it's huge. But in the end, if a visit comes and goes and we say, I don't know that player at all because I just talked to the parent the entire time, for us, we don't feel comfortable bringing that kid onto campus. It's definitely it's a balancing act. At times throughout tours and whatnot, two of us will walk around. If it's me and our second assistant Jackson Root, Jackson might take the player in the front end of the tour, and I'll work with the parents in the back end to really get to know them, or vice versa, because I think that stuff's important. But in the end, if we don't know the player after a visit, and we pretty much all we did was talk to the parents because they wouldn't let their child speak, that's a huge red flag for us.
CJ, last question, and this is something we've asked everybody so far. Like, if you were to give advice to a high school player that's going through the process right now, it's slower than it's ever been before. Like, what would that advice look like, and what should they be prioritizing in the recruiting process?
Yeah, I think it comes back to like the product, right? And what is your product that you're showing, right? So you got to be strong. Like, invest in strength and conditioning early on, so everything else becomes easier for you. Within that, but also be open minded. I think we've had success with getting a lot of high school kids that are out of region, interested in Maine, and the ability and opportunity to come play at the Division 1 level, and develop, but also have a really good foundation of human beings around them. I think that's important. Don't be dead set on one school, because that one school may not be interested or may not call you. And at some point you're going to have to make a decision that's, it's a challenging one. And my biggest thing that I always tell guys is make sure you go see campus, especially high school players. Go see campus.
100%.
Your parents never bought a house without seeing the house. And you got to go see campus, make sure it's a fit for you, see what's going on, and get to know us, as human beings, before you make that big decision.
Yeah.
Well, CJ, thanks for joining us, man. And obviously, guys, check out University of Maine if you're going in the process. And thanks